Hey everyone, welcome to Kempner Sports. My name is Rev Trev, and today I've got a special episode on running backs. We're going to be talking about dead zone running back strategy. So the big question we're going to be asking is, do you avoid those running backs completely in the dead zone, or do you walk through the graveyard finding life? Finding running backs can help you to win a championship by competing and by contending. Let's hit the intro and then we're going to get right into it. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you have not hit that subscribe button, I encourage you to do that. I hope that you find really great fantasy content where we can help you to compete and to contend and so that you can win a championship. So today, as we dive into the dead zone running back strategy, the big question we have to start with is, what is the dead zone running backs? This data is not just based from last season, even though it was amplified from last season for sure, in last season's drafts, but it's actually data that's been collected for the last 7 years that wide receivers drafted in rounds 3 to 7 outperform the running backs drafted in rounds 3 to 7. So basically the running backs from picks 30 to 70 are the ones that you want to avoid. They're considered the dead zone. They're graveyard. They literally decimate fantasy teams and fantasy options to winning a league. Now, it really comes down to who are you starting in your flex position. Does your flex position give you an advantage over your opponent? The theory goes a little bit like this: like, quarterbacks are similar. Now, they're all created equal. They're not created equal. If you're starting Josh Allen and I'm starting Justin Fields, which I would never do, you're going to win that matchup every time. You're probably going to win that week. But we're talking about if you're starting Stafford and I'm starting Mahomes, what's the point differential going to be? And Stafford could beat Mahomes on a given week. Wide receivers in your starting positions and running backs can be similar. You have very solid wide receivers, running backs in those spots. Tight ends, we know that are not all created equal, but if you have 2 elite ones or 2 weak ones that you're facing your opponent with, you both have weaker ones, who wins? And it's usually the guy who has the better flex option. And so, is this true? Okay, is this the theory that's true? Not always, but the averages say that it's way wiser to pick wide receivers in the dead zone than to avoid all those running backs from picks 30 to 70. So why is there a dead zone? Well, let's talk about that, because this is actually one of the most important pieces why running backs fail so much. Number one is that they are a lot of running backs by committee. Now, Aaron Jones was considered one of the elite guys who was always going high. And now A.J. Dillon has come in, who's an absolute beast as well. And they're not splitting, but he's taken away a lot of the carries, a lot of production, because they want to keep Jones healthy. Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, same kind of deal. If it was just one of those guys there, these guys would be going in round 1 or 2 every time, but they're now sliding back into rounds 2 and even sometimes into rounds 3. You can get Aaron Jones or Javonte Williams, and which is insane if you think about it, right? So this is why one of the reasons why there is a dead zone is because there's running backs by committee. The second one is that there's risky running backs. All the elite ones are taken in those first 2 rounds. Some people double running back up there, okay? And then then you have these risky ones, people who have not been proven yet, people who are coming back from injury, people who are overhyped in camp, which happens every single year. And the third reason is because maybe they're on bad offenses, but they're the number one running back, and fantasy experts will tell you, get that guy because he's going to have production, and it's all about reps, it's all about touches, it's all about, it's all about production. And so there's some bad offenses that produce really good running backs. And so you got to figure those out. But that's why there's a dead zone. And then why are wide receivers better? Well, they were league winners found in those rounds and in those picks. But this is a strategy, not a for sure thing. So you need to understand this. You can pick the wrong wide receiver in the running back dead zone. You can pick that league winning wide receiver and destroy your opponents. Now, last year, for example, the wide receiver league winning poster boys was Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp. If you had one of those two guys, you were most likely going to the finals. Because they were drafted in that dead zone. The running backs that were okay to draft in the dead zone, which were not very many, was basically DeAndre Swift, who as well got injured, and Javonte Williams, who we've just talked about. This is what we're talking about when it comes to what is the dead zone, why, and what's the reasoning behind it. So we're going to dive into some ADPs, average draft position, if you don't know what ADP means. And we're going to go from Fantasy Pros, their ADP. A lot of people use that as the standard of where people are getting drafted at and what the values are and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about this year's dead zone running backs. We're going to use last year as an example using this year's ADP, okay? So but first we're going to start about who the names are. So Akers, Zeke Elliott, Connor, Montgomery, Gibson, Breece Hall, Etienne, Elijah Mitchell, Dobbins, A.J. Dillon, Jacobs, Damian Harris, and CEH, okay? So those are what we would consider the dead zone running backs for this year. Do you avoid those guys completely, or do you risk and take some of those guys? And then this is this year's potential league-winning wide receivers that they're in this series thing, and it's Higgins, it's Deontay Johnson, Michael Pittman, Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore, McLaren, Metcalf, Mike Williams, Godwin, St. Brown, Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, Sutton, Cooks, Brandon Cooks, Amari Cooper, Mooney, Allen Robinson, and Jared Jeudy. So those are the two different lists. So if you can look at these lists now that I'm going to put right here on both sides, I hope I can get this in properly. You now can see the fantasy numbers from last season. Okay, and then you can also see the players that are injured. So, for example, Zeke Elliott and Connor last year had 228 and 239 fantasy points, while someone like Elijah Mitchell, who's getting a lot of hype these days because he was injured, only got 155 points because he only played 11 games. You see that CEH was also injured, only had 108 fantasy points, but he only played 10 games. So, also, ETN missed the whole season. Same with Dobbins. Breece Hall's a rookie, so we actually don't have any data on him. Montgomery, who was a higher pick, only scored 175 fantasy points. And so this is where that goes. But then you go into the potential league winner wide receivers, you see that the numbers are much more consistent and higher. So T. Higgins, like Deontay Johnson, had 220 fantasy points. Mike Williams and DK Metcalf are 208, 206. Mooney had a better year, 170, 79, and his counterpart, the part of it is because his counterpart got hurt. Allen Robinson only played 12 games and only had 68 fantasy points. So, but now Robinson's out of there. Mooney is the number one in Chicago. A lot of people are high on Mooney. Sutton is there, and he was lower. Judy was lower, but he got injured in his first season as well. And now Russell Wilson comes into here, and so all these people get elevated. DJ Moore now might have a better quarterback situation. Maybe he'll do better. Pittman has a better quarterback there. Deontay Johnson probably doesn't have... Well, actually, I would argue that he probably does have a better quarterback there because Big Ben was so bad last year. So these are who we're talking about in the winners. Which one of these wide receivers is going to elevate their game and help you to contend and compete and win a championship? The reason why at the end of these days, why this is so important is wide receivers points per game or year-end totals were higher and the running backs are... Well, my first few initial thoughts on that thought is there were only 13 running backs picked in those spots from 30 to 70. Like, if you look at that, it's because all the elite, the stud running backs are already picked in rounds 1 and 2 and part of 3. Okay? So, and then there's 17 wide receivers. So the volume's better, and you see that there's just more production in those wide receivers in the dead zone. So, but my question is that will this strategy, even though it's worked for the last 7 years and especially last year, will it work for you this year? Yes is the answer if you pick the right wide receivers. But if you can pick the right running backs in those dead zones, you can win your league as well. Their numbers were higher, but it was all about who you picked. Like if you picked McLaurin and Sutton and CEH, you would have been one of the bottom end teams in the league, right? But if you picked DK Metcalf, who didn't even have a great year, Mike Williams and Connor, you probably would have won your league. And so that's why the teams that landed Chase or Cup with the combination of Javonte Williams probably won their leagues because the rest of their team was decent. So how do you find the right player? How do you find the right player? Well, this is the billion-dollar question. I've got a couple suggestions. First is that you got to pick wide receivers or running backs, whichever one, who don't get injured. So you need to listen to some fantasy doctors on that, because on those lists, some people are coming back from injury and everyone's hyped about them. They might not be ready. Or maybe someone's got an injury from training camp or from the preseason that you need to be aware of so you don't end up picking those guys. Now, you can't avoid injuries completely. I totally understand that. But you got to do your homework there. Number 2 is you got to just hit on those correct running backs. And sometimes it's those guys that come off that injury that nobody's seen yet. Maybe it's Dobbins this year, or maybe it's whoever, right? Maybe it's Akers. Maybe it's ETN. Maybe it's none of those guys. But you want number 1 running backs who don't get injured, who are in good offenses is an absolute bonus, but we know that it can be on a bad offense and you can still do well. Number 3 is there's always exceptions to the rule. So, for example, I had David Montgomery and I picked him in round 4, I believe, last year, maybe round 3, and he didn't have a great year. 175 fantasy points was not the greatest. He had some weeks where he was great, some weeks where he was average or below average, a lot of those. But when it came into the playoffs, he started picking things up. And in fact, in the finals, he and Cooper Kupp, who I had traded for, had the 2 highest scoring point totals of my whole team. And I had Jefferson, I had Kelsey, who failed me, I had other guys. There was Chubb was terrible in the last week, and I won because of David Montgomery scoring. I think he had 18 fantasy points, and I ended up winning by less than 2 points my championship. And so that there's exceptions to the rule, so don't just throw it out. And so that's my conclusion to this is do your research, okay? Don't just listen to the latest slogans or trends or all these experts that are trying to get your clicks. They say stay away from the dead zone running backs, or only do 0 RB. Well, listen, 0 RB, I've already done a video on that. 0 RB strategy is really good if you're in a full PPR league. You have 3 wide receivers that you're starting and 2 flexes. Like it depends on your standard and your scoring, right? So most times 0 R back, 0 running back strategy is not good. And then you hear people say, well, now the trend is hero RB strategy. Well, listen, you gotta pick some of the best players available at the rounds, and you got to formulate your team and structure your team. You can listen to these people for some advice, for sure. Glean some information, but this one expert will say this guy's terrible, and this one will say he's amazing, and which one do you listen to? It's hard to tell. So you have to do your homework, you have to do your research, and that's why we don't pick Josh Allen and let's say Patrick Mahomes in round 1. It's bad strategy. You can get good quarterbacks later, or you can get them later in the fantasy drafts if you want. That's why taking Mark Andrews, saying, hey, he was the number 1 tight end last year. Well, will he be this year? That is the key. We don't know. If you take him in the first round, it might be a stupid pick. It might be a smart pick. We don't know if he's going to repeat as the number 1 tight end. So the key to drafting is finding great value and production in round 6 to 12, okay? So I've got a couple things I want to show you here. So I just want to show you a couple teams that I drafted, okay? So a couple teams that I drafted in this avoid dead zone strategy, and it doesn't turn out as bad as I was thinking. So in my first, I picked 10 just because that's where I'm going in a 10-team league. So this would be a little bit better results. If I did a 12-team league, you would even see it more so amplified. Okay, so Joe Mixon, I got it at number 10. Number 11, I got Nick Chubb. Okay. So then I avoided running backs for the 3 to 7, 3 to 7. So I went Tyreek Hill was available, which is an elite wide receiver, just in an unsure offense with Tua, but I'm sure he's going to have a great year. I got an elite quarterback with Herbert. I got Jalen Waddle, who everyone's still high. So I went double wide receivers for the Miami Dolphins, which I just realized now, and Deontay Johnson I got in round 6, and then round 7 I went and got a tight end. And so that is where, and then I went and got Singletary, Gordon, Elijah Moore, Henderson, it doesn't matter, Lockett after that. So my starting lineup would be Herbert with Hill and a combination of either Waddle and Johnson in the flex with Goddard at tight end, and my 2 running backs would be Mixon and Chubb. And that actually is not a bad team. Okay, now let's look at this next one. This is the second team, which I actually like a lot better. Again, at pick 10 in a 10-team league, I got Joe Mixon, and then I decided to pick Kempner early because he has tons of potential and upside, okay? So then if you look at it right here, I got A.J. Brown, who's another elite wide receiver in a very unsure system with Jalen Hurts, who was, I think, the number 9 fantasy quarterback last year, which was insane. And then I got Keenan Allen, and then I got Patrick Mahomes in round 5, and then after that, the wide receivers weren't that great, but I got Allen Robinson, who has had elite level talent, just been in a subpar Bears offense. So now he's in with the Rams. And then I also got Goddard there in round 7. And then I got Chase Edmonds, Bateman, Hunt, Devontae Smith, Lazard. Those are just some of the bench players I got there. So I actually like my second one better because I start with Mahomes at quarterback. Then my wide receivers plus flex would be A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, and of course Allen Robinson. And then my running backs would be Kempner and Mixon. Now Kempner, we don't know about suspension, so I'd have to throw in Chase Edmonds or Kareem Hunt, who also wants to be traded. So there's some drama there. He's dropping in drafts just because of all the drama. So not terrible. Not an horrific strategy. I just think there's a better way to do it. Now, please, if I'm wrong, please post in the comments why you think I'm wrong or what I'm missing. I would love to hear your feedback, but this is my thoughts about Deadzone. Running backs 3 to 7, rounds 3 to 7, picks 30 to 70. I think that you can pick some of those running backs there in those rounds and have huge success. You just got to pick the right ones. But isn't that the strategy of every single fantasy draft? Picking the right players, right, that are going to help you to win. Hope you learned a lot here, and I hope you have a great day.